I just wanted to welcome everybody, first of all, to this knowledge share session, and it's about the power of audiovisual communications. I'm Steph Bridgeman, and I'm a media intelligence consultant, and it is my pleasure to welcome Marsha Shandur, who will be sharing her insights on how to craft successful sound bites and offering strategies to us which will help us to better communicate in this increasingly audiovisual world. Now, before I introduce Marsha properly, just let me take a moment to thank eMedia Monitor, who have facilitated today's session. This is the fourth in a series of webinars hosted by eMedia Monitor about the power of audiovisual storytelling within integrated communication strategies. Our previous sessions have explored behavioural science behind broadcast, the topics around audio-visual communications in times of crisis, and the evolution of verbal storytelling and what it means for the media intelligence industry. eMedia Monitor specialises in monitoring broadcast communications, so sound and image, TV and radio, podcast and YouTube, providing results and alerts in real time. eMedia Monitor also supplies broadcast monitoring and analytics capabilities to the media monitoring sector and to PR agencies directly. So, we do talk a lot in the media intelligence space about integrated communications, but we actually really rarely lean in to explore the topic of broadcast as a thing on itself. So I set out to speak to professionals who can offer perspectives on the power and the value of broadcast and communication techniques beyond the written words. And Marsha here is well placed to guide us. Not only did she start her career as a radio DJ here in the UK, but she has been coaching and training both individuals and organisations such as Meta, HelloFresh, Government of Canada on how to give captivating presentations and tell memorable stories. And her work has been featured in Forbes, Mashable and on the BBC. Marsha, welcome and thanks for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful. And we should perhaps let a little secret out of the bag, perhaps, and get this out of the way just to start with, because we've known each other for a long time, since the late 80s. And back in the day, broadcast was a different thing to what it is now. There were, in the UK particularly, a limited number of TV stations, a limited number of radio stations. We didn't have the internet, social media wasn't a thing. And so there were actually probably limited occasions for people and humans to get the spoken word out there. And now we have an abundance of it. And I think this is a challenge that many corporate spokespeople, many CEOs are really struggling with right now, is to tell a captivating story, but through their mouths rather than through the written word. And that's why we really wanted to speak to you. So perhaps you could start by just telling us a little bit about the work that you do, and we can start from there.
So I work with organizations and individuals around, as you mentioned, writing captivating presentations, storytelling. The way I think about storytelling is a little bit different than I think some of my colleagues, in that when I'm talking about telling a story, I'm not necessarily talking about telling a narrative beginning, middle, and end. I'm talking about using the power of storytelling, and we can talk about what that is and all the magic that happens inside your brain when you're listening to a story, just by describing a little moment. So you don't necessarily always need a narrative to use storytelling. You can use it in all sorts of different ways. And so I work with clients. Often I'm brought into organizations when, say, there's people who need to give presentations, whether it's like within a team huddle or, big presentations to like an all hands. I work with people individually one-on-one to help them write keynotes and presentations, and I'll do workshops on storytelling. And then another thing that I call ethically persuasive communication, which is essentially, how do you ask somebody to do something in a way that makes them super grateful that you asked and therefore more likely to say yes. And I started doing that because I realized people were pulling me in going, we need to be better at storytelling. And then I would be like, okay, but if you don't think about this, this and this, it doesn't matter how good your stories are, they're not going to move the needle. People will be entertained, but no one's actually going to be driven to action. And so you need to think about some things before you even consider telling your story. And that for me is what the ethically persuasive communication is.
So it sounds like you've actually done a bit of study around this. Have you read in terms of the fact, the psychology behind storytelling? Have you Have you explored, some textbooks? Are there certain key thinkers in this space that have affected your way of working, or have you just picked these techniques up along the way?
I think it's like picking techniques up, and in terms of the brain science, I'm more diving into like individual studies. I studied psychology at university, and I'm kind of psychology nerd, and so I love to find out the brain science. And there's so many things that I used to think instinctively, and now I understand are backed up by the brain science. So, for example, I used to say to people when I was working with stories, what you're trying to do when you're telling a story is you're trying to elicit a Freaky Friday style body swap between the person listening to the story and you in that moment. And what I now understand is that they've done studies where they put people into MRI machines and they look at their brain when they're listening to a well-told story. And what happens is your brain literally responds as if the story is happening to you. So I talk about smelling coffee, your olfactory cortex lights up. I talk about grabbing this pen, your motor cortex lights up, specifically the part related to hand movement. And then that's also happening to you as the storyteller. So that's really powerful connection between us. And then another thing that I used to say is I used to say when someone tells a story in a room, and it could be like a room of 200 people, it could be a party with 3 people, it could be on a virtual room like this, there's a kind of alchemy in the room. And what I realize is it's not alchemy, it's neurology. It's everybody's brains lighting up in the same place at the same time, like a giant benign alien invasion. But it's really powerful connection, and that's what storytelling can do. And again, your stories don't have to have this beginning, middle, and end. It's just about describing little scenes.
And it's important to get that captivating story out, perhaps in the beginning of the story, to capture their attention. Is that the right way
Yeah, I
to
think at the
focus it?
beginning, yeah. So can I tell you my model of storytelling that so this is the most important thing. If you forget everything else I say for the next hour, this is the thing that I want you to remember. And I have a framework for storytelling that originated in a sentence that was given to me by my storytelling teacher, whose name is Sage Turtle. And she told me when you're telling a story, you're making a movie inside your listener's brain. Okay, I'm going to say that again because it's so important. When you're telling a story, you're making a movie inside your listener or reader's brain. And so if you think about movies, there are 3 kinds of action scenes. I've just remembered we're also speaking to British people. I live in Canada now, and so that's why I say movie. Let's say film. So there are 3 kind of scenes in films. There's voiceover, which is disembodied voice from the future giving context or philosophy. So if you think about like Morgan Freeman at the beginning of Shawshank Redemption saying there must be a con like me in every prison in America. It's giving context and opinion. That's voiceover. Then there's montage, and montage is lots of real-time scenes cut together with music to show passage of time and or something changing. So if you think about high school movie makeover montage, romantic comedy getting to know you montage, Rocky training montage, those are all montages so that we don't have to watch 32 hours of Sylvester Stallone training. We just get the gist in a 3.5 minute song. So that's voiceover, montage, and then the third one is action scene. An action scene doesn't necessarily mean like an action movie. It means anything where everything is happening in real time, sometimes slow-mo, but usually real time, all from the perspective of one or a couple of the characters. And so that's what an action scene is. So most movies are mostly made up of action scenes. When I do workshops on this, sometimes I show clips, I might show a clip from Black Panther or something where it's an action movie, but it's not a scene where action is, where it's like fighting or space fight or car chase. It's just anything where it's happening all from the perspective of one or a couple of the characters. And when you're watching, if you think about watching a movie, if you watched a movie and the whole thing was voiceover, that's kind of a boring film, right? That's basically an audiobook. If you watched a film and the whole thing was montage, it's like a very long music video. It's not a good film. And so you want most of your movie to be made up of action scenes, and then they might use voiceover and montage to get from one set of scenes to the next. When you're telling stories, those 3 scenes are the same. So I might tell you a story that says, when I was 18, I went traveling around Europe. I visited 9 different countries. I felt it was important to meet people from different cultures and expand my horizons. So you know about that trip. You know what I did. You know my opinion on that trip. You don't really know what that trip was like. Montage would be little flashbulbs of pictures. So when I was 18, I went traveling around Europe. I drank red wine in Paris. I looked at the street art in Berlin. I walked the canals of Amsterdam. You know more about that trip, but again, you don't really know what it's like. But action scene is getting super granular. It's saying I'm standing on the subway in Paris when this woman stands up and starts walking towards me, and I panic because I think I don't speak French. And then in perfect English, she says, "I'm terribly sorry, you seem to have dropped your 200 franc note." So that's action scene. That's where the magic happens. actions. So just like with films, you want most of your stories to be mostly made up of action scenes. If your story spans any length of time, you can't tell the whole thing in action scene because nobody has 5 years to listen to your story, and a lot of that action was boring. So you either just pick the scenes you want, and or you use voiceover and montage to get from one set of scenes to the next. But in terms of the beginning of your story, when we tell stories to our friends, we usually start in context. A few years ago, I had this boss I really didn't like, and I'd always go in, and he would. And context by its nature is voiceover and montage because you have to cover a lot of ground. So by its nature it's not as exciting for our brains. So when you're telling a story, you don't want to mess with the chronology, but you want to start, this is the one time you do, because you want to start right in the action, give them something that will intrigue them to carry them through that slightly less interesting voiceover and montage of the context, and then go back into the action. So you might say, I'm sitting in the car outside my sister's house and I'm terrified. My sister and I had been, really close as friends, as kids. And then when we grew up, we became less close. And now there's a family reunion. And now I'm about to see her for the first time in 3 years. So it's like that bit at the beginning, I'm sitting in the car outside my sister's house and I'm terrified, is what pulls us in.
And I suppose these are the types of techniques that one increasingly needs nowadays, perhaps if one is in a public speaking kind of situation. I think one of the challenges I've had over recent years is I'm so used to speaking from behind the screen where I can't see anybody's faces. But there's something about doing a keynote in a conference situation where everyone's looking at their phone. And they might be looking at their phone because they might be live posting social media posts about how brilliant you are, but they may also just be totally not engaged. And it's those kind of action sequences, is it, that would likely wake them from their slumber and
One of
listen to
my
what you say.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories came from one of my clients who I worked with in tech, who had been doing a presentation to a room full of people who were all on their laptops. And they were sitting on their laptops and he could sort of tell he was losing them. And then he suddenly thought, oh, I'll use the stuff that me and Marsha worked on. And so he stepped up from the podium and said, but first, let's go to my bathroom. And he said that his colleague in the back said, everybody's neck snapped up. Because when you're using storytelling, part of it is it's a pattern arrest. It's something that people aren't expecting because they expect every speech to be you saying, today I'm going to talk about this. Now I'm talking about it. Now I'm going to tell you about it. That Dale Carnegie thing of tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And I still think that that is very valid. Like if you're speaking to a corporate audience, you don't want to walk out, just start telling a story because they're probably going to freak out and think, oh, is this a motivational speech? If you're speaking to a bunch of life coaches, absolutely you can do that. But if you're speaking to a corporate audience, like with my clients, we'll always have a sentence at the beginning that says, today I'm going to speak to you about thing that you're interested in, thing that solves a problem that you have, and then throw in something intriguing, like including the one question I want you to ask yourself every day, including 2 steps you must take within the next 7 days. And then you say, but first, I'm going to tell you a quick story. And then you go into your story. And if you have a story at the beginning, it does so many things for you. First of all, it's that pattern arrest. It's a slightly different thing. Secondly, stories really make us engage with people. Often when we're making new friends, we'll tell stories. That's how we get to know each other. Because a story can really show your lens on the world. So with clients, I often call it getting in the boat. If you tell a story at the beginning that everyone's engaged with, it's like the whole audience gets in the boat and then they're just like, where are you going to row us, Steph? Like they just will be listening to you for the rest of it. Partly because they feel like they're engaged by you. It builds that like know, like, and trust factor because the more we know about someone, the more we like them. And then it also shows your lens on the world. And so like I feel like we've all had that experience of being at an event. Often for me, it's like going to a conference where I don't really know anyone. And then somebody tells a story and you're like, I love you, new best friend. Usually for me, it's a story about them being awkward in some way because I'm feeling so awkward and I'm assuming that everybody else is like perfectly confident and cool. So when you tell me that you're awkward, it doesn't make you any less good at your job, but it shows me that like I'm not alone and it's okay for me to hang out with you because you're not going to judge me. So yeah, I think it absolutely grabs people in. And even like the way that you start that story, what we talked about of having that, starting right in the action, is you're creating an information gap. It's the same as saying, including the 2 things including the one question I want to ask you. So information gap is a term that they use in marketing sometimes. Probably lots of people on the call know it, but just in case you don't, an information gap is anything where you have some of the information, but not all of the information. So, those BuzzFeed headlines that were like 12 weird costumes dogs wore, you'll never believe number three. And you click on it, even if you don't care about dogs or costumes, because you have to know what number three is. As humans, we hate an information gap. We're like desperate to close it. We also love it. It floods our brain with dopamine and oxytocin. An information gap is what's happening when Netflix is doing that swipey thing. You have to be up for work in the morning, but you're like, I'll just watch to the credits on the next episode. I'll just read the first page of the next chapter. And so by creating something at the beginning of your story, the beginning of your speech that has that information gap, it keeps people listening because they're desperate to keep listening. It was a thing I learned about in radio when I'm trying to throw through the ad break. Nobody wants to listen to ads, but if I'd say coming up after the ad break, new single from the Foo Fighters, and also a song that like, you don't think it's a love song, but listen to the lyrics, it's a love song, that's next. And then I hit the ad break and then people are like, what's the song? What's the song? What's the song? I have to know. And that's what keeps them listening.
That's brilliant. So I love the idea of sort of breaking the pattern and sort of waking people from their slumber. I guess corporate messaging can be sometimes quite dull and formulaic, and to be able to convey those messages in a slightly different, authentic, personalized kind of storytelling kind of way is a way in which a company spokesperson could possibly deliver a message, but in a more engaging way. Have you coached organizations in that way?
Yeah, often. And actually, I just had somebody recently who messaged me telling me about a talk where she had to do some really dry material. It was about like project management of a bridge. And she told the story at the beginning. And then when she got to the dry material, she kept calling back to the story. And that's what made it interesting. And storytelling also can be so helpful in getting concepts across. So if you're thinking about storytelling in terms of action scenes, it doesn't have to be a real story that happened. It can be a theoretical story about your client. So say you have some piece of software, you can say, okay, when you go to do this particular bit of data entry and it's always really slow to go through and you're sitting there waiting for it to go through and you're thinking, oh God, I have better things to get on with in my day. Imagine if instead you clicked the thing in and it immediately worked and you could go and get on with a job that you were actually paid for. So I just told you two stories there. One is about how your life sucks before you use my software. The second is about how wonderful your life is going to be afterwards. And there's crucial elements in there of storytelling, which we can talk about, like the most important elements if you want, which are around like sensory details and emotion. You're still putting those in, but it's a theoretical story about the person you're talking to or their client.
Okay. How do you get those that you've coached to then recall all of the information that you've coached them with in the heat of the moment?
Practice, 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 practice. There's kind of this myth that the only way to be good at storytelling is just to like be born with the gift and then the words fall perfectly formed out of your mouth. What I would say is that any person that you think is just a natural storyteller, they're probably naturally practicing those things. Like, so I live in Canada and they have raccoons here and people hate them. They call them trash pandas. I think that they are glorious heavenly creatures. And the other night I was in my room and I saw the security light come on and I looked out and there is a panda out. I mean, no, there's a trash panda. There's a raccoon out there. And so I'm watching the raccoon and then as soon as the raccoon goes away, immediately in my head, I start thinking about how I might tell that story. So by the time I actually talk to someone, I've practiced it 2 or 3 times over in my head. And so if you're not naturally used to telling stories, think of stories and then practice them. And practice out loud to an empty room is fine, but it gets the story into your bones. The same with all of the talk, when I'm working with clients. Walk around when you're practicing it, especially if there's a bit of text you need to learn. And also the most important thing to learn is your last sentence. Always know how you're going to get out of it, so that if your mouth does go for a little wander, as we find sometimes when we're put on the spot, you have a North Star to come back to. Can I talk about what I think are the most important parts of storytelling? Because I feel like I've sort of touched on it. Okay, so if you think about that action scene, there's 2 questions that you want to ask to write that action scene. And the first question is, what did it look like? The second question is, how did you feel? So what did it look like is like anything sensory, where are you? Who's there? The what did it look like in those theoretical stories I told is you're sitting at your computer and you're doing this bit of data entry. It's just like, what do I need to know in order to understand what's happening? But the most important one, the biggest mistake I see all the time in storytelling, people often think it's too much detail. To me, it's not enough of the right detail. And the right detail is including emotions, answering that question, how did you feel? How did you feel? How did you feel? Because if you answer the question, how did you feel? Or if it's a story about someone else, how did they feel? Then that does so many things. Number one, it shows us what the stakes are. Because if you're sitting at your computer and you click on the data entry, like, Okay, if you're sitting in the car outside your sister's house, I bumped into my neighbor in the street. But if I bumped into my neighbor in the street and I'm terrified, okay, now I know something's going to go down and I care about what's going to go down. It shows what the stakes are. It also creates that information gap because now, you're sitting in the car outside your sister's house and you're terrified. Now I need to know why you're terrified. Now I want to know. And it could be like I'm sitting in the car outside my sister's house and I'm so excited. And then you give the context and I'll keep listening through the context because I'm like, why are you excited? Why are you excited? So it creates that information gap. But the most important thing that it does when you include emotion in a story rather, is that I can reach in and grab that story because maybe I've never sat in the car outside my sister's house and felt terrified or excited, but I know how it feels to feel terrified or excited. So now I can connect with you. And now I don't have to like do a lot of work to translate that story to my experiences because I know how those emotions feel. And so that's part of what makes us feel really connected.
Okay. Any further description around those techniques?
So I think with the first bit, sensory detail is another way that we can connect. If you say I'm sitting in the car outside my sister's house and I can feel the plastic of my steering wheel sweaty under my hands. Now again, we're like in your story. We're doing that Freaky Friday style body swap where we feel like the story's happening to us, and that creates really powerful connection. And with emotion, there's different ways you can describe emotion. Like you can just name, I was terrified, I was excited. Those of us who are British or settler North Americans aren't super good at that, but it is a skill that you can practice. I always tell people pick something that you do. If you're not that good at it, pick something that you do several times a day, like getting a glass of water or going to the toilet. And every time you do, ask yourself, how did I feel? You probably won't feel much of anything, but you might be like, I'm a little bit happy or I'm a tiny bit annoyed. I have one client who, she's a retired dancer. She's very expressive and she's American. She said, Marsha, you told me to think about how I feel every time I go to the bathroom. And the emotion I have is always joy because I love urinating, which I was like, I can fully get behind that. So one is just name the emotion. Another one is describe the internal monologue as you are having that. So it's like I'm sitting in the car outside my sister's house and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, why did I do this? I should have stayed at home. Okay, we know you're anxious. That often is easier for us, those of us who don't have that much access to emotions we feel. And then the last one is the hardest, but also the most powerful, is describe where you feel that emotion in your body. When I'm working with clients and organizations and running workshops, I'll often do an exercise where I get people to think about something very exciting that could happen and really imagine themselves in the moment and then go into their body and ask themselves, like, where do I feel this emotion? What shape is it taking? Is it moving or still? Expanding or contracting, all of those questions, because it's so powerful. If you say, if you were to say, I'm sat in the car outside my sister's house and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, why did I do this? This is going to be awful. Good, better than most stories. If you were to say, I'm sat in the car outside my sister's house and I feel terrified, again, better than most stories. But if you say I'm sat in the car outside my sister's house and I feel dread in the pit of my stomach, it's so much more powerful because now we feel dread in the pits of our stomachs because of a thing in our brain that's called mirror neurons. So mirror neurons are a part of our brain that we use to emotionally connect with people, to empathize. So okay, I'm going to show you, Steph. Do you see my hands here? If anyone's not watching, just
Yeah.
confirm, like they're fine, right? They're just
Yeah.
not a pair of hands. Okay, so if I were to tell you that a month ago I was grating some carrots and I accidentally grated my fingers.
Yeah.
Okay, I just saw your mouth flinch there. You know
Yeah.
that I'm fine. I told you I'm fine.
Yeah.
You've
Yeah.
seen my hands. You yourself, it didn't happen to you, but your mirror neurons just made you flinch because that's how powerful they are. So when you can describe a physical sensation, our mirror neurons will make us feel it, and that's incredibly powerful connection. And again, that can happen in those tiny little theoretical stories. You can tell a story about, when you go to start your car and it doesn't work and you feel this like anxiety in your chest, I'm going to be late. It's like a tightness. There you go. That's a little story I told that doesn't exist, about a made-up story about you that maybe it's happened, maybe it hasn't happened. Hopefully, it's a story that's happened with your client. And even those stories that you choose, that's where the ethically persuasive communication comes in. Because one of the things that you want to do, even before you're thinking about telling stories is get super, super clear on, first of all, what is my goal from this interaction, from this piece of communication? And I don't care if your goal is I want people to think I'm really cool. Like, that's fine. Get clear on your goal. Or is it I want people to drive people into like this particular action? It might be buying your product. It might be thinking of you as a thought leader. It might be whatever it is. Get really, really clear on what the goal is, both in general and more specifically. So the general goal might be like, I want to be seen as a thought leader. And the more specific might be, I want people to approach me and ask me to speak at conferences. The general goal might be like, I want more sales for a product. The more specific is, I want people to go into a shop and ask for this particular product. So get clear on what your goal is. And then the two things you want to get crystal clear on are, what are the problems that the person I'm speaking to, the person I want to hear me, has that the thing I'm suggesting can solve? And what are the desired outcomes that they have that the thing I'm suggesting can deliver? And one thing that's important here is not the problem they have, but the problem they think they have. So
Yes.
they might think, I don't know, the problem is that they're not confident enough, or that people are speaking over them because they're annoying. And what is the problem is they need a bit more confidence so that they can speak up, whatever it is. Or they might think the problem is like the car they have is no good. And that the problem is the way that they're using this car is actually. But you need to get clear on what they think the problem is so that you can couch that first story, that before story, into that, what they think it is. Because you want to describe a story that makes people be like, oh, yeah, that just happened to me this morning. And then you want to get clear on the desired outcome so that they can see what it is you're leading them towards. And in an ideal bit of communication, you don't even mention your thing until you've got clear on those two things. When you can't, if you
Okay.
can come in and say, are you problem, problem, problem? Do you wish that desired outcome, desired outcome? Well, this thing can help you get from problem to desired outcome,
Yeah.
because then people have bought in, they're listening. Whereas if you just come in and say, here are all the features of what we do, if I can't connect those features to solving a problem or delivering a desired outcome, I'm just not even going to listen to you. And then you can use that to find your stories, because you can tell stories about people who had that problem, and you can tell stories about people who had that desired outcome.
I just want to go back to the sort of mirroring element of it and
Yeah.
the story you told me about the cheese grater in the hands and me going like that. Is it something also linked to the fact when people are actually talking human to human in the same room as each other? And I might be sitting like that, and then you may end up sitting like that. Is it about that? Is that also a kind of visual cue of building empathy that happens between people, and you're trying to get that
Yeah.
through your use of words?
I think so. That's a little less outside my wheelhouse. My wheelhouse is mostly the words, but I do think if you go in and you have your hands crossed, or like a thing I'm always telling people is get your hands out your pockets when you're on stage. Your hands in your pockets when you're on stage is like, I care so little about you that I'm just going to stand here slouching. Like, having your hands up. We also don't trust people whose hands we can't see. Like, I'll often use photos where my hands are visible, because people trust you more if you can see your hands. There's other certain things with your hands, like a thing I learned from this amazing lady, Vanessa Van Edwards, who runs an organization called Science of People. I'm writing this down, by the way, because I'm making you all a secret webpage where I'm going to link to all these people I'm talking about. She taught me that if your hands copy what you're saying, people trust you more. So if you say two things, subconsciously, people are like, now she just said two, and her fingers are making a two. She must be very trustworthy. It's big, it's one tiny thing. We trust you more. So that's where I think hand movements can help. And yeah, definitely there's things that you can do that are repellent to people, and having physically open body more appealing. Another thing, this is such a tiny thing, but often when speakers have one of those little Britney mics, they have the freedom to roam the stage, and they do, and it's really hard to watch. It's like watching a tennis match. And so you want to move with purpose. You want to stand and say your bit here, and then maybe for the next bit you're going over here, or maybe whenever you tell this kind of story you stand on this bit of the stage, but whenever you're doing background information, you stand still. But so you can move from place to make it more dynamic, but you just don't want to be doing that wandering around.
So I know there's element visual cues as well as there are spoken cues in terms of building trust, authenticity, and believability. I suppose some of the new ways in which we're communicating now, increasingly podcasts started off as audio, but now increasingly they're being put on YouTube. So actually the visual element is as important. Is just another dynamic that people are having to contend with. They have to think about the words that are coming out their mouth, but also think about how it's being captured captured visually, and messages can be, as you say, messages can be conveyed through those visual techniques as well. Are you finding that the type of training that you're having to do with people has evolved, let's say, over the past 10 years as these new forms of audio visual communication are becoming more prevalent? Were you giving them a different type of training back in, let's call it that analog era, let's say, and it's changed now? Or
I mean, I think yes and no, but mostly no. Like mostly no in terms of the work that I do, because humans are humans are humans. I mean, now even one of the things is that I'm teaching people when you're doing stuff online, like try and make sure if you've got slides that you don't have the whole thing in slides and your head is just a tiny little blob in the corner, because people are connecting to you more than they're connecting to the slides. Please don't put slides up covered in writing. Please, 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 please. I see it everywhere. I see like SVPs of giant multi-billion dollar companies doing it. Literally, somebody cannot read and listen to a different, can't read one piece of text and listen to a different piece of text. That's like my like desperate please stop covering your slides in writing. But mostly, yeah, I feel like humans are humans, and what connects with people connects with people. And so I've definitely heard people sometimes being like, "Oh, storytelling wouldn't work in this situation because, it's too corporate and formal, or it's too techy." But actually, as we're humans, we connect with stories. Obviously, not everybody, everybody is different. But on the whole, when you are telling stories, that's what will connect with people. It lights up completely, as we discussed, completely different parts of the brain. We remember it better. We connect to you. We connect to whatever it is you're talking about. And it makes us change emotionally, and emotions drive all of our decisions. When we're making decisions, we're using prominently a part of our brain called the orbitofrontal cortex, which is about, if you were to kind of drill about 2 inches behind the eyes, you'd find it. And it's where we hold the memory of emotions. And so we're often asking ourselves, will this decision make me feel comfortable in the future? And so if you want to affect people's decisions, you have to affect their emotions. And storytelling is like a super easy way to do that.
okay, another thing thinking about emotions is that anxiety that comes often before one has to speak. What can you teach people about dealing with that sort of anxiety that comes before a performance, so to speak? Have you got techniques you can teach them?
Yeah, so I think honestly, the more you can practice, the more you can get to know what are your core stories or what's your core messaging, the better able you're going to be able to come back to that if you get anxious and if your brain starts to flood. What happens when we flood? So there's this thing called the hand model of the brain. And it's the idea that like your wrist is your brain stem. If you're just listening to this, not looking, I have my thumb over my palm and my fingers wrapped over the top. And when you're activated, when you go into fight or flight that you might do because you're nervous about speaking. I actually learned this in relation to looking after a toddler. What happens is it's like your frontal, so you're this up here. So this is your amygdala, your thumb is your amygdala, which is kind of your base instincts. And then the thing wrapped over the top, the fingers wrapped over the top are your frontal lobes. And so your frontal lobes, your frontal cortex is where you have nuance of thought. It's where you have access to all the things you can remember. But when you're offline, it just flips up. So I learned this in context of like when your 3-year-old is screaming their face off at you, there's no point in saying, you're not allowed to hit me, don't do this, because they literally can't hear you. They are offline. Like you have to wait until they're back online to have those conversations. And that's why I parent in a way that makes my mum roll her eyes 360 degrees, because when my child is, her head's spinning and she's screaming and green vomiting, like in The Exorcist, I'm going, oh, it seems like you're really angry. But that's because if I were to just tell her off, it wouldn't make any difference. And in the same way, when we're like activated by being nervous about public speaking, our frontal lobes like whoop, flip up. And that's why our brain kind of floods, because we're in that fight or flight, because our brain doesn't know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger is running towards me or I might make a fool of myself on this podcast. And so it thinks, okay, great, I know what to do. I'm going to pump all the blood into the arms and legs and away from the frontal lobe. So one of the things is doing things to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. Deep breathing helps you do that. Breathe in for 5, hold for 5, release for 6. So deep breathing helps you do that. I'm trying to think what else. Even things like humming and singing help you activate that parasympathetic nervous system and calm you down. But if you deeply know your content before you start talking, even if they throw a different question at you, you have something to come back to. And even in the moment, like take a breath. Don't be afraid to think. People generally, that's like a high status thing to do. Somebody who makes you work for the answers comes across as much more confident than somebody who goes, well, blah, 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 blah. I mean, as a person who does the latter thing, I don't have that like power charisma as much. But if you can just look at them and smile and pause and take a breath, Usually, if you look in the eyes of whoever you're speaking to, it will come back to you, particularly if you have studied in advance. And if you need notes, have notes. It's always better to have notes and do a confident talk than it is to not have notes and to freak out.
What about those situations, which happens to me frequently, where you do start a sentence and then you completely forgot where you were going? It's sort of linked to anxiety, but I think also partly linked to the fact that there's so much going on in your head and you're wanting to rush to get it all out, that you start and then you're like, oh, I can't even remember where this was going. Is that also a moment that one takes a pause and uses those techniques too? And how do you get yourself back on track and on message?
So what I do with those, there's two elements here. One is that I'll take a breath, I'll kind of say something, and then I'll be like, and then I'll take a breath. And then once once a new thought, any new thought comes back to me, I'll say that other thought. Because the second part of this is that people will always follow your physical cues, and that's what they will believe. So if you make your body look like you are confident and calm, they will believe that you are. I once was in a workshop, this is quite early on when I was teaching storytelling, and I was in this room full of 50 people, and I started telling them, and you know how sometimes your brain is like, oh, let me jump on this little neural pathway train track. And I started telling them, like, here's a way to help you. And as I was halfway through talking, it was not long after I'd left radio, I was like, oh, wait, this is a thing that pertains to being a radio DJ that doesn't in any way relevant here and actually is probably quite confusing. And I saw them all looking at me a little bit like, and then I just took a breath and went, another way to talk about this is blah, blah, blah. And because I did it with confidence, they were all like, oh, well, I guess I'm the dummy because I didn't understand. But now I understand this new thing. So if you just act as if you are confident, there's a great TED talk by Amy Cuddy, where she talks about not fake it till you make it, but fake it until you become it. I feel that that's truth in so many ways. What I used to teach is networking, making industry friends. And when I go to conferences, when I usually am speaking on stage, something like that, I'm really confident when I'm doing that. But when I go to a conference and I don't know anyone, I kind of want to throw up the first 4 hours. But if you looked at me, you wouldn't see that. You would be like, oh, wow, confident girl is just walking up to people, woman, just walking up to people and saying hello. But in my head, I'm like, oh, no, what if I say hello and then they don't want to be friends with me because they think I'm a weirdo with no friends? But I don't let them know that, I just act as if I'm confident, and then people believe it, and then that makes me more confident. So I think it's just like, take a breath, look pensive for a minute, like you're thinking, wait, is that what I wanted to talk about? I think I have a better way to say this. And you can even say something that I want to say instead that's more important, because then they'll be like, oh, I definitely want the more important thing. Forget what you were about to say. Even if in your head you're being like, oh my gosh, I just lost my thought halfway through the sentence and now they're all going to think I'm stupid. Just pretend that you're not thinking that and they will believe you.
So tell me, I want to go back to this concept of ethically persuasive communication. Is that a phrase, your phrase? Is this a phrase used across the industry? Tell me more
Yeah.
about it and why it particularly appeals to you.
I mean, I don't think I'm the first person that's ever used it, but I sort of came up with it from myself. And the ethically part is because this isn't about coercing people. This is about helping somebody with something that they would want that will help them. It's basically like, instead of, I think about it in terms of sales, instead of the sales model of like, if you don't buy my stuff, you're a loser, and like trying to bully people into it. It's just being like, hey person, do you have this problem? Do you have this desired outcome? Did you know that there is a way to go from problem to desired outcome? I can help you with that. And then introducing your thing. It's just letting people know. Like, if you think about, what's in your bag or what's in your pocket and what is there that you bought, you're probably not like, oh, I really resent that person for forcing me to buy that particular wallet or whatever. You're probably like, oh yeah, I have this pink wallet that I really love. And I'm like, I'm so glad I was able to find a pink wallet. It makes me happy when I pull it out of my bag. I don't resent them for taking my money. That solved a problem. I needed a new wallet. I wanted it to be a jolly color. Amazing. Now I've done that. So it's just about problem solving. And I think that's really important, because it's important sometimes because it helps people who might otherwise feel pushy, but it's also like has a lot more longevity. That kind of bullying people into doing things or buying things often does work short time, but it makes people resent you, and you don't want that. Like, you don't want a relationship where someone sees you as their bully or somebody who's shamed them into doing something. So ethically persuasive communication is more about like helping people do the things that they would want to do anyway.
Okay. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning your early career in radio, and you brought it up a little bit in one of your previous answers. And I would love to speak to you a little bit about that, because radio is a fascinating a fascinating medium. Intrigued to know firstly how you got into it. You were on a radio music station specifically, but I'm also intrigued to know whether you often had occasions where people would ring in or whether you would work with advertisers or organizations like, people coming on to speak to you, or was it less of one of those kind of talk radio stations?
Yeah.
Um,
So
you know,
my station, XFM, was a music radio station. If you're in London, it's now called Radio X. It was a music radio station, so we didn't have that. We would have sponsor reads where we were given certain things that we had to hit. And so our job was like, how do we make that sound interesting and different every single time? But we didn't actually do interviews with people.
but
Like
that's
we did interviews
interesting.
with kind of comedians and musicians, but we didn't do interviews with with companies.
But you had as a DJ on the airs, you had the messaging, but you had the freedom to make that messaging more interesting. So
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I will say, I'm 15 years out. I don't know how things have changed, but just from listening to the radio, I assume it's the same. And I listen to a lot of radio and I hear them getting out those sponsor messages. And usually when someone's sponsoring something on radio, there's something in it for the listener. So they're never just coming on and saying, new, buy Jenny's glasses. Jenny's glasses help you in these ways. They might be like, oh, we've got 5 pairs of Jenny's glasses to give away. And all you have to do is text in with, the time that you wore a pair of glasses and they fell off your face, and I'll read those stories out or whatever. Often the DJs are coming up with those little games themselves. They just know that they have a competition. And we might have to say a read of like Jenny's glasses, the best glasses for your nose or whatever it is. But mostly it's just about like, how do you sell this competition? But you're making sure you're saying it in conjunction with, Jenny's glasses, like you're making sure that you have those little sponsor messages, and then there are ads in between, but the ads are done by production teams. So that was not mine.
Did you get into the industry? I
How
should
do I
have.
get into it?
Yeah,
A
I'm
lot
so.
of, yeah, it's a very inequitable industry in that there is a ton of working for free. So a lot of privilege is the answer that had a family who were like, paid my cell phone bill and let me live at home for like a year and those things, because you do a ton of working for free. Community radio, I did student radio for years, and so any kind of student or community radio. I mean, I think now making your own podcast also could be an option, because it's just about kind of getting practice on the air. And then it's really all about networking. That's why I was teaching networking when I started out in this career, because that's how you get anywhere. And networking isn't about, I also taught it because I used to think it was about schmoozing and brown nosing, and I found that really scary. And what I realized is it's just talking to people that you like about things that you're both interested in, but you have to talk to people who aren't your friends already, and you have to follow up with them over email. And so it was a lot of that, and just constantly reminding people of your existence over and over again, so that when an opportunity showed up, you were the first person they thought of, not because you were the most qualified or had the best references, but often because you were literally the last person who emailed them that didn't come across as an idiot.
Yeah, I always remember the early days of networking. It was always the opportunity, it used to be about the 60-second elevator pitch, and then it would be about the repetition of the 60-second elevator pitch over and over again. And in a way, that's a sort of technique, but we hone our own story. Tell me what you do. I
Yeah.
work in a particularly niche industry, and I can tell different people a different story to describe what I do, and it comes out in a different way according to the audience. I suppose that's also another technique, is to tell the same story, but in different ways according to who's listening.
Totally, totally. And again, you want to think about that ethical persuasion piece. When I work with people still sometimes on networking, I try and get them to come up with a sentence that is, I help demographic soul who have pain point. I do thing I do to get them to desired outcome. And the thing that I'll put that formula on the secret webpage. The thing that we care the most about is thing I do. That's the thing they care least about. Unless you're one of 2 dentists in a small town, nobody cares how you do what they do. What they want to know is, do you understand my problem, and where are you going to get me to? And the demographic part of the beginning, and the demographic can be people with this problem, but the more you can niche in on the demographic, the more people will feel like you're speaking directly to them. And so it's making sure that you have that. But honestly, the relationships are so much more important. Like if you heard about a great opportunity and there was 2 people who would be a good fit, and one of them was someone you met at a conference and they had a wicked elevator pitch and they were like very charming in the 15 minutes that you spoke to them, and the other one was someone you'd gone for coffee with every 2 months for the last 2 years, who are you going to offer the job to?
The coffee person.
a coffee person because you
Yeah.
already trust them, you have a relationship with them, you like them, you want to help them. And so it's all about building relationships and building, I used to call it making industry friends because it's about building those friendship-like connections. So instead of going into a room like I used to and thinking, I've got a network, who should I network with? It's going into a room and thinking, who would I be friends with here, irrespective of their jobs? Or if it's a specific personal group of people, it's like, how can I make a friendship-like connection?
Yeah.
I hate the question, what do you do? I'm a really big fan of the question, how was your weekend? What was one thing you did that was fun? Or how was your
Yeah.
week? Because people it's sort of both very impersonal because people can choose how deep they want to go, but it's also very intimate. Like I would ask you that if we were chatting, how was your weekend?
Yes.
What was something you did that was fun? And you get people talking about something they're excited about, which is always more fun for both you and them. And you're more likely to find those points of connection that aren't related to work. Like, oh, you play squash, I play squash. You know, you have a kid
And
at this
that's,
age, I have a kid at
yeah.
this age.
And that builds that deeper connection. I think it feels like I've already taken some of your courses already because I'm doing some of these techniques already. It must have
You're just a
seeped through
natural. You're a
osmosis over
natural.
the years. But oh, that's amazing. So okay. Well, I suppose if we kind of reflect, it's what's been so fascinating. I think on this one and also on a previous webinar is so much around the sort of psychology and the brain element. And I've forgotten that you did studied psychology back in the day as well. I suppose a lot of that then speaks to subconscious behaviors, subconscious responses. It's about sort of um, natural responses to either particular sound or particular picture that you're building through the words or a picture that you might be articulating through your hand movements. Is there something to be said around that element about,
I mean, I think almost everything we do is subconscious. I'm working with a client right now, James Shepherd, who's he coaches people who are in startups, who are like a few years into their startup. And he talks about how everybody is living in a different reality. Often when we're in conflict with someone and it just seems so baffling to us, it's because they're living in a different reality and they're optimizing for something completely different than we are. And so we think, well, why are you doing this thing? It doesn't make sense. But to them, it makes perfect sense. And I think almost everything we do is subconscious. It's like unconscious bias. You know, anybody who's done unconscious bias training, it's sort of horrifying when you do that training because you start to see as you move through the world all the ways you're making assumptions about people that you just have no way of knowing if they're true. But we naturally do that. And we do that because we have to put things into categories. Otherwise, every room we walk into would be a nightmare because we'd be totally overwhelmed by all the things that we see. And it influences us in different ways. So, yeah, I think absolutely there's so much that's subconscious. And that to me is some of the magic of storytelling is like you're getting people on, there's a great book by Jonathan Gottschall called The Storytelling Animal, which puts forward a very convincing hypothesis that we are built to be storytellers and that's what we did, not just before to pass down information, not just before the internet was born, before books were born. That's how we
yeah,
passed down
yeah.
information, was through stories and through songs and through like storytelling songs. And so we naturally are storytellers. My daughter, her first ever, what her first sentences that she would say would be Mama Babu Ow, which means Mummy gave me a bottle. Now it's all done. And it's like a little story that she would love to tell over and over again. We naturally tell stories and we naturally love to listen to stories. And we also make up stories all the time. We make up stories. Oh, this person didn't email me back. We make up a story. Oh, it's because they hate me. Oh, it's because they're annoyed with me. And it's not like this. I do that story all the time, and there's 20 people I haven't emailed back because I just never got round to it. But in nature abhors a vacuum. And I think that's another thing that's so important when it comes to messaging and when it comes to putting stuff out into the press or whatever it is, or speaking to, all hands. If you don't create the story, they will create the story. Nature abhors a vacuum. So if there's a gap, if you lay off a bunch of staff and then you don't tell anyone what's going on, they will come up with reasons for that. And then you are not in control of that narrative anymore. And so you need to come in with your story first to drive what that story is. Because if you don't, someone else will. You can guarantee.
Okay. One of the things we spoke about when we were preparing this session is about, getting people to actually enjoy the process of telling the story. I suppose that is down to the preparation, down to the practice, down to the speaking to yourself when you're preparing and going, putting the kettle on and so on. Are there any other ways in which people can actually enjoy themselves when speaking? Let's
I
talk
think
about
one
this
thing
sense
is
of enjoyment.
I think one thing is tapping back into a place of service. I'm going to assume that anyone listening to this call or on the call isn't just like Machiavellian out to try and ruin the world at no benefit to anyone other than themselves. And if you can tap back into like, why am I doing this? Why do I have this messaging? Why am I doing this work? Who am I helping? That's a way to enjoy it. And also to stop thinking about metrics and stop freaking out about like, but how many people listen to that podcast? How many people watch that Instagram video? And know that like if you can help one person, I have quite a big TikTok following. I have 54,000 people, but on TikTok it's sort of meaningless because I'll release a video and 500 people will see it and it'll get 2 likes. And then I'll release another one and that goes viral and 100,000 people saw it and it got, hundreds of likes. But what I try and tap into always is service, is like, am I helping one person? Did I say something that potentially could help someone? Okay, even if it's just one person, that is enough. That's a person I helped. A really great way of thinking about metrics comes from a lady I follow called Alexandra Franzen, who talks about, and she talked about it in terms of like, if you have your mailing list, that like if only 6 people read your mailing list, she's like, imagine them sitting around a table. Imagine 6 people. If you got 100 views on that Instagram video that you were interviewed on, imagine 100 people in a room. That's so many people. And so keep tapping into the individual humans and stop thinking about the like social media metrics of like, oh, but was it as big as that other person? But keep tapping back into service, I think is the main
I'm
thing.
so pleased you said that, Marsha. I'm obviously a bit of a measurement nerd. I'm in the media intelligence business, and for the past 25 years, I have been encouraging my clients to get excited about the smaller number. To that point, audiences are shifting, audiences are fragmenting. One has to actually almost be ever present everywhere in all different kind of channels to reach your audience where they are. Long gone are the days, appearing on terrestrial TV will reach 50% of the population, and certain radio stations will reach a certain proportion of the population. And it's so true, that point of, how much would you pay to actually have 10 people sitting around and listening to you and captivated by you? Or how much would you pay to have 3 people doing that? And so it is the power of the smaller number. And I suppose with these modern types of communication, we're recording this session today. We hope it's going to go on YouTube. These are kind of enduring long tail forms of communication that can have an impact not just kind of today, but tomorrow. And I suppose there's that to be said in terms of how our verbal and audio visual communication is a bit more impactful than it ever was before.
I'm so glad you mentioned long tail because that's what I was thinking of. And for anyone that doesn't know what that phrase means, it kind of, well, do you want to just explain it? Because I feel like you're the expert here.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's just about, you know, in the days of, let's say, live TV, that the audience happened then and then it was gone. If you didn't watch it live, it happened in the moment. In the days of nowadays, in terms of online news, actually, the audience can happen on the day it's published, but it can happen 10 years from now because people are still seeing that article, or it might be getting surfaced in an AI summary response and so on. Similar with YouTube, they often say you get most of your views in a certain amount of time, but if you look at views over time, certain things and certain prompts can lead audiences back to it, and it can be reused, and content can then be called evergreen, all this kind of stuff. So I don't know if I've described long tail,
Yeah.
but
And
that's a
I
long
was just going to say the long tail refers to like the curve of those views because it's like it starts here
yes.
and then
Okay.
down, but there's this long tail that can keep going for a really long time. Yeah, I think absolutely. And the other thing is quantity rather than quality. Like I had one video that went viral that was me talking about this dance party that happens in the Pitch Black in Toronto. It's called Dark Dancing TO. It's super fun. And I'd gone along and they didn't have that many people there. So I was like, I'll make a TikTok, 500 people will see it. Maybe they'll get a couple more people. It blew blow up. 800 people joined the Facebook group, but
Mhm.
it's not what I talk about. And I didn't mention my business in it. And so it doesn't matter that like 100,000 people watched that video. Maybe some of them started following me, but mostly they weren't my people. Whereas when I do something on like, here is my train framework for how to write any single presentation or training that you do, follow this 5-step process. Like that's the one that I want to blow up. And it got way fewer views, but I know that those views are my potential clients. And so I care about them much more. So it's also really thinking about quantity rather than quality. And often that is going into those little niche spaces where you're not going to get the sexy big numbers, but they are much more impactful to you because those are the people either who are the customers or who are the influencers who are then have the ear of your particular audience. And that's who you care about much more than just having like vanity metrics, big numbers.
Love the fact that you threw out vanity metrics. We are actually speaking the same language, Marsha. We work in completely different industries. We come from a similar, we have a similar background, knew each other all that those years ago back in the day, but we're using the same kind of buzzwords and keywords. And it's interesting how these phrases actually cross parts of our different silos that we work in. So it's great that we're chatting in the same way there. I'm conscious we're kind of getting close to the wrap of the hour now, so I feel like I should be wrapping this session up. I should have had an end sentence already prepared to leave all listeners on high, which I have failed to do so. But I would love to thank you, Marsha, because you've shared techniques about how we can be better at speaking in real life, in conference situations. I think you've given us some tips as to what we can do if we're speaking in these kind of longer form opportunities, webinars, podcasts, and so on. You've made us think about what's inside and how important it is to work on the elements on the inside as well as what's coming out of our mouth. And actually, I think a lot of it is all about the preparation and the practice. I really appreciate you joining us today, Marsha. You said you've got a secret website page that you're going to be putting some further resources on. So we will link to that when we share the recording for those who are unable to join us live.
And
Any
that is
final thoughts from you, Marsha?
Well, first of all, I want to say for those who are live, that webpage is Yes Yes Marsha. I have a hand symbol. I stole it from the village people. Yes Yes Marsha, just like it sounds, marsha.com/e media monitor. If you go to yesyesmarsha.com/e media monitor, I've got a couple of resources on there. I will go in now and add in all the links to the people that I mentioned, Vanessa Van Edwards, the TED Talk, James Shepherd. And that's where you can find all of those resources and find out a bit more about me. I also made a video of that thing, the most important storytelling rule of the action scenes, voiceover, and montage, in which I reenact both the Rocky training montage. A little fun thing for you, Steph, because you've met my mum, that there was one scene in the Rocky training montage where someone's punching him in the stomach. And so in the reenactment, it's my mum who's punching me in the stomach, just pretending to. And then I also reenact the classic scene from The Graduate in which I play the roles, both played by Anne Bancroft and Dustin Hoffman. But it just tells you about that kind of those three action scenes, the most important rule for storytelling. And I'll put all of those on. The most important thing I want to say is if you take away one thing, it's what's my one thing? I think what's most important is not the storytelling, but the ethical persuasion. Is before you're trying to convince someone of something, before you even open your mouth, get clear on what is the problem that I'm solving. What is the desired outcome that I'm delivering? Lead with those two and only then introduce what you want to talk about, because that is how you get people to connect with you. And you can use storytelling within that, of using those theoretical stories. What did it look like? How did you feel? Those action scenes. But if you do that, it's going to be so much more persuasive and ethically persuasive. And so it will feel good to you.
If you want to be one of Marsha's many thousands of TikTok followers, you could go find her there. I love watching your clips on LinkedIn, and we're seeing more and more people posting video on LinkedIn, but you're doing it in a proper professional and ethically persuasive way. I really enjoy listening to those 2 or 3 minute clips that you post up there, and I encourage everybody to go and take a follow over on any of the social media channels where we can find Marsha's little snippets and videos that are posted frequently, many times per week, I think. So please keep it up. Thank you for all the guidance you've given me over the years, and really appreciate your time today. Thank you, Marsha.
Thank you. And I
Thank you.
linked all my socials on yesyesmarsha.com/e media monitor.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.